Hi, welcome. I'm Josh Block. I'm a foreign policy scholar and adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. I am pleased to be joined today for an important discussion on Iran's AMAD nuclear weapons program. It was a crash program Iran started in the early 2000s to build 5 working nuclear weapons within a matter of 3 to 4 years. And it advanced to a really scary point, but a point that the public didn't really know about until the Atomic Archive was made public in 2018 after the Israeli Mossad spirited out of Iran 300 tons of their own records on the nuclear program. Among the very few people in the world who've had access to the full archive and the materials are 2 of our guests today, the nuclear experts and researchers David Albright and Sarah Burkhard of the Good ISIS. And also joining us today is one of America's great patriots, Norman Roule. Norman served the United States and went to bed every night knowing and thinking about the things that the rest of us don't want to have to know about at all, and protected the country for 34 years as a member of the CIA, and also was an expert in Iran and was the national intelligence officer for the entire intelligence community from 2008 until 2018. Is that right, Norm?
Yes, I was the National Intelligence Manager from 2008 until about 2017. Thank you.
There you go. So if there's anybody who knows more about what America knows about Iran, I don't know of that person. So it's great to have the 3 of you here to discuss this critical issue today. First, David Albright, let me welcome you. You and Sarah have just published a book, Iran's Perilous Pursuit of Nuclear Weapons, which is in large measure based on your analysis and access to the documents in the archive. And it revealed, as we said, this AMAD program. What about the archive was interesting or special? When it was first revealed to the world, there was a lot of there's nothing new about this, old news here. Was that what you found when you went in there?
No, actually, we didn't know what we'd find. I mean, had some briefings by knowledgeable Israelis. So it took many months to finally start collecting the documents. I mean, they're in Farsi, and Israelis translate from Farsi to Hebrew, and then maybe some into English. So there was a lot of translation issues. But I think what I saw was immense details about a nuclear weapons program that certainly I had never seen before, and I don't think had been made public. And it provided tremendous insight into the Iranian thinking about how to make nuclear weapons. There were links to assistance from former Soviet nuclear weapons experts that helped innovate the design. There were discoveries about how they were going to make weapon-grade uranium that were frankly very surprising. And so I think it was a very interesting collection. And I think at my institute, we're very interested in understanding these smaller scale secret nuclear weapons efforts. And I think the archive has been an unprecedented set that's been made available to the public. I mean, obviously much of it is classified. There's a tremendous amount of nuclear weapons design information. There's a lot of test data that rightly should remain classified, but there's a lot of information that has been made public, and it allows a lot of insight into what Iran was thinking. It also showed that pressure worked. I mean, I think it was a little inadvertent, or let me put it this way, not inadvertent, but we didn't know about it. But I think the archive shows that Iran stopped its plan to make 5 nuclear weapons. And that largely was due to international pressure, including the United States having troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also the work by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so I think it's a victory for the international community that Iran didn't proceed to build those weapons.
Norm, thank you. I wanted to ask you quickly about the 2007 National Intelligence Estimate, which came out before you were in charge of that entire process. Is that right?
Well, I was actually at the Central Intelligence Agency, and I was the head of the Iran Operations Division. So I was not part of the process to do that, but we were fully informed and in routine hourly contact with the individuals working it.
But you didn't get to edit the final draft. You didn't get to, like, the wording in the final draft wasn't necessarily how you exactly would have put it, or were you, were you a contributor? You're not the editor? Is that what that means?
No, there were officers in my area who were part of the drafting
Excellent.
and developing group. So I was fully informed as to what the
great.
would be, and we had a large voice in that, obviously.
So that national intelligence estimate was significant in that it reported a couple of important things. I'll read this quick paragraph that summarizes them, and you can tell me where this is right. This is according to Eli Lake and Josh Rogan in 2015. The most recent unclassified U.S. intelligence estimates of Iran's nuclear program is from 2007. And it said that in 2003, the United States intelligence community had high confidence that, quote, Iranian military entities were working under government direction to develop nuclear weapons, end quote. But the report also acknowledges intelligence gaps and therefore only assesses with moderate confidence that the halt in 2003 to some activities, quote, represents a halt to Iran's entire nuclear weapons program. So to me, that sounds like, we think they stopped in 2003, most of it, but we're not totally sure. We think they may have continued some related things, but they're not building weapons right now. Is that basically right?
Well, I think there are 5 points that I would raise quickly, and I think they all underscore everything that Sarah and David have produced in their product, which I must say is extraordinary, fascinating, digestible, and I believe there will be nothing written on this topic for years, decades to come that will not include this publication as a primary footnote. It's just a unique piece of work. But the 2007 IE, when it was declassified, did indeed say that Iranian military personnel under government direction had worked on a nuclear weaponization program that was halted in the fall of 2003, and that this was done due to international pressure that followed from Iran, an understanding of Iran's covert nuclear weapon program. However, there were other points that went in there that deserve note. It did state that Iranian entities were continuing to develop a range of capabilities that could be applied to a nuclear program, were such a program ever to be authorized in the future, that the abandonment of that program was a political decision, and political decisions are inherently reversible, and that decision was probably based again on that pressure. It repeatedly stated that Iran had no evidence of a covert nuclear program at that time. And I think it's fair to say since 2007, if you assume that that remains extant, and I think there's a lot of good reasons to say that that is true, that covert weaponization program as exists in 2003 is not reformed. But it does also state that convincing Iran's leadership to maintain a halt in that program would be difficult, because there were those in Iran, continuing, who are still present in Iran, who would believe a nuclear program is a way to achieve their national security and foreign policy goals. Final point I would make is that the document also stated that we thought Iran would build a program, if it chose to do so, with covert facilities and using centrifuges to provide the fissile material. So those key points, I think, are all reflected in the information produced by the archive. I'm comfortable in saying that there is no information produced in the archive that challenges any of the significant statements made in that NIE. I think it's a good moment for the U.S. intelligence community. Mm-hmm.
David, your thoughts on that quickly?
Well, it's always hard to. I think one of the things in our work, U.S. intelligence community uses a different vocabulary than we use. And I think what I saw in the archive was the planning to continue activities that were part of the nuclear weapons program, more on the development side, more on preserving employment of people, kind of wrestling with some of the bottlenecks, for example, in the neutron initiator. They weren't finished. But an effort to preserve the capabilities and extend those into the future, and to work on certain parts of the program. Now, from our point of view, we see nuclear weapons program slightly different, and I'd be curious Norm's reaction. I mean, there's programs that are actively building nuclear weapons. There's also programs remaining prepared or preparing themselves to build nuclear weapons if they're given the order to do that. And for us, one of the best examples of the latter was Taiwan, and the U.S. Very successfully and secretly ended that effort in 1988. And I think we can all sleep more peacefully at night because of that tremendous, and particularly U.S. CIA effort to end that program. And so, but we see Iran and this we see coming from the information in the archive, as a program that's preparing to build nuclear weapons if given the order to do so. It's in a sense, a readiness program.
And one of the things you touched on there, and Sarah, I want to come to you in a second here. One of the things you touched on was the decision in 2003 to downsize but not end the nuclear weapons program, as you describe it in the book. And you actually go into some detail about some of the, I mean, it's amazing detail that we have from these meetings, their own notes of how they decided what to distribute. Do you want to talk about some of that?
Well, there's a 69-page document where they go through all the different parts of a nuclear weapon and decide what they're going to do about them. And so the Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, sort of, we consider him like the Leslie Groves of Iran's nuclear weapons program, very skilled manager, wanted to preserve his capabilities in the program. I mean, he understood he could not build weapons, which, from what I understand from media reporting or from what, let's say, European intelligence sources, he was extremely upset about, but that he did want to continue things. And they wanted to continue some of the facilities, keep people on the payroll. They established post-AMAD successor organizations that the IA has studied a considerable amount.
And they divided it into contaminated and non-contaminated work?
Well, there was a decision, and they talk about having overt and covert work, that some work could be done in the open with a kind of a civil or non-nuclear military justification. Some work would have to be done covertly, and neutron initiator work was put in the category of covert theoretical work on nuclear weapons codes, which they continued needed to be done covertly.
And then as the program was going forward in this 2000-2003 period, they were beginning to build and planning the infrastructure they would need to produce these things at scale. Is that right?
Well, that was part of the AMAD plan.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what I mean. In that period.
Yeah, and what I think what we saw, and again, this we had to rely on the briefers in Israel, and we spent a lot of hours having the opportunity to question the people who were analyzing the archive, 3, 4, 5 of them in total. And one of the things that they said was that the let's say the production scale plant to make weapon grade uranium cores for nuclear weapons was not finished. The pilot plant may have continued afterward. I mean, it's just a mystery if it continued in some way afterward. I mean, we don't know the answer. They didn't know the answer. But clearly the order was don't build them. And so it's just, there are many questions that still remain. But the facilities to produce nuclear weapons, we think overall were shut down. The facility, so there were activities that continued that had to do with maintaining capabilities, and the way I use the term being prepared to build them, and to work on some bottlenecks. I mean, the IA information talks about several areas where they found that nuclear weapons were continued at least so certain activities continued at least until 2009, 2011.
And the Washington Post, when they reported on the book, Shelby Work cited that, sort of honed in on the notion that they were basically done with the building, and they had an indigenous, unique design. You found not one copied from North Korea or someone or Pakistan or someone else, but a design of their own, and that they were basically almost ready. They were ready to do a cold test, and all they really needed to assemble weapons and go forward. The final step would be to have the fuel, and they didn't have that enrichment program at the time. But then they began to assemble one in secret. And that's what we discovered at Fordo eventually, right? Sarah, you did a lot of work comparing satellite imagery of facilities to unknown and to verify them. Can you talk a little bit about that process and kind of what you found in totality of the facilities around the AMAD plan, and then maybe the post-AMAD pieces as well?
Yes. So starting with the post-AMAD fate of these facilities, I think the fate for many of the facilities that we didn't know about prior to the archive tracks well with Iran's post-AMAD decision to downsize the program. Like David said, some of the production scale facilities were not finished, were left unbuilt. The Shahid Borogerdi tunnel site, for example, that was started but not finished and then repurposed later. But at the same time, some facilities, some key facilities to resolve some of the remaining bottlenecks, those were continued. And the Fordo site is a good example. The project under AMAD that was called the Al Ghadir project, it hadn't gotten as far as the weaponization side of the program got under AMAD. And so after a brief halt, I think in 2003, 2004, the site was continued to be built, and apparently in its original design, true to its original purpose of making weapon-grade uranium, or at least highly enriched uranium. And so when the site was revealed in 2009, and inspectors went, I think what we now know is that inspectors saw that the layout of the site was still similar to what you would expect for a highly enriched uranium production plant.
In the book, you guys talk about how in order to jumpstart and accelerate their program 10x or so, they had made a plan to move low enriched uranium from Natanz to this Al Ghadir plant, right, to then up enrich it more quickly. Is that right?
Just Josh, for me or Sarah?
For you, David, or either one.
Yeah, no, I think AMAD had a complete clandestine program to mine uranium, the Kashin mine, to turn it into uranium hexafluoride and then enrich it. And it even had its own centrifuge program. But I think it realized that the Atomic Energy Organization was far ahead of its effort. And one of the things that faced the Al Ghadir project is it was going to be an underground site to hold 3,000 centrifuges. And these are first generation. It just wasn't going to make enough weapon grade uranium. And so they made a decision that they would get low enriched uranium from the Atomic Energy Organization side, plus assistance on centrifuges, and that then they could boost the weapon grade uranium output threefold and it, up it to about 30 kilograms a year. And so that there was always this, I mean, I would not call the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran a civil nuclear energy like what you see in let's say Britain or France, even nuclear weapons states, where they try to segregate civil and military, or I should maybe use the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and facilities associated with that. I mean, there are clear links between Atomic Energy Organization and the military side, and that the Atomic Energy Organization resources are drawn upon to help the military side.
Sarah, you've talked about that too, that the program is layered, it's built on itself. One can't function without the other in essence.
Yes, I think what we found is that the AEOI program and the military program were a little more intertwined than we had previously thought. I think with AEOI personnel being on key decision-making committees, for example, and then like David just said, with their reliance on Natanz produced low enriched uranium.
Are there other sites that you guys found or looked at from the air that you want to mention or you think are significant, want to show?
Yes, so I picked these two sites because I think, so they were both unknown prior to the archive revelation. One, the IAEA expected to exist based on information and activities that had found place at a site called Marivan, but the location was unknown. And then the other site was completely unknown. And so I picked these two sites because I think both show that Iran was closer to building a nuclear weapon than we previously thought. But because of the activities that took place at the one site, Shahid Maladi, I don't think we had previously known that they did such extensive work on making metal components with surrogate materials, gaining the knowledge, gaining the experience. I think one of the Israeli intelligence officials described the work conducted at Shahid Maladi as massive. And the archive has photos of equipment there. We don't know where it is now. And it has photos of cast hemispheres that were made at the site. And then let me show you the site real quick. Okay, so this is a site that Iran built kind of late in the AMAD program. It had started the construction of the production scale metallurgy plant before it was, before it decided that it would need a pilot plant to practice some of the skills and to test the design, etc. And so in the summer of 2002, Iran picked this workshop located at Shig, the Shahid Hamad Industrial Group, and it renovated it quickly, and then it started operations in about April 2003. And so this is what the site looked like before AMAD repurposed it for its own purposes.
And again, in here, they were manufacturing substantial quantities of parts for the assembly, to assemble into a weapon. Is that right? Well,
based on what we were told, is that they likely did not get to handling actual uranium metal at the plant, and they obviously didn't have any weapons grade uranium, but they were very close to being able to handle uranium. And up until that point, you just practice with materials that are similar to the target metal. And so this is what the site looked like before, and then this is what it looked like after AMAD renovated it for its own purposes. It added this ventilation up here. It added these two pits. And then this is from 2003. And then this is one example of what we saw in the archive is we had this ground photo, and it nicely correlates with this satellite image. You can see the ventilation ducting in the background. The shape of the roof. You can see one of the pits in the background. And so that's one of the things we did. And so in theory, with all these locations that were revealed in the archive, now anyone could go and look at them in Google Earth or get the satellite imagery and correlate them with the ground photos in the archive. And I don't want to say it's easy. And we were lucky to have Frank Pabian to do this with us. He's one of the most experienced and best people out there to do that. And then I also want to mention that
this is important, Sarah, because it allows you to verify the information that you're saying, right? You can tell everything is real. It's not.
Yes, that's right. So that's one of the ways that we can show and gain confidence that these archive materials are real, to correlate them with other existing open source information, like satellite imagery.
Okay, so go ahead.
And then I just want to show you that this was one of the sites that remained intact after 2003. And then it was only dismantled later in about 2010, 2011. And
we don't know what happened to the equipment that was there, the manufacturing equipment, or anything. Norm, does that concern you at all? Like, where is all the stuff they were using to make these things? You were saying earlier, maybe it's old, maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, or does it?
So I think we should enter this process of understanding Iran's nuclear program with three main points. This information is legitimate, it's real, and it's proven. Second, Iran has lied and continues to lie about its nuclear program and can't be trusted. And thirdly, the JCPOA itself was built on the premise of distrust and verify, but you need distrust and verify and some degree of persistent access to questionable locations that Iran is unable to deflect by saying these are military sites, they have nothing to do with nuclear issues. This is just your efforts to obtain access, or just an effort to understand our missile program or other military secrets. So the Iran has proven it can't be trusted. This is a political decision, not a technical issue, to build a nuclear weapon per the 2007 NIE. This information shows they have a massive industrial capacity that at one time existed, and they have a general idea of how to rebuild that even without Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. And the international community therefore needs a plan to prevent this, since they're only a political decision away from making this operational.
Okay, great. I've got a follow-up for that. But Sarah, I want you to explain this thing here, and we'll come back to what Norm just said, which is very important.
Yeah. And so this is actually one of the sites that the IAEA visited. It had suspected that it existed. It didn't know the location of it prior to the archive. Then it knew, and then the IAEA went in the fall of 2020. Some of you may remember the site because it's one that Netanyahu presented in July 2019, because Iran quickly moved to raise the site. And so at the point, Netanyahu showed everybody this logistical support site down here. But the more interesting site is actually this outdoor test site where Iran would conduct high explosive tests of nuclear weapon subcomponents. And we know from the archive information that at least 4 tests had taken place in a 7-month period at this site.
Why are those tests important to the development of nuclear weapons?
I don't know, David, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think there were 4 interrelated sites testing components of nuclear weapons, 2 of which had high explosive chambers. So the testing were in these chambers inside buildings that looked nondescript. The Maravan site is where the larger high explosive tests were being done. And in fact, what you see is over time, the testing shifts from the buildings with chambers, high explosive chambers, to the Maravan site. And we think there's a picture from the archive in the slide Sarah's showing. We think that was a pre-test that the Iranians were doing before they would do a cold test, which is a full up or mocked up nuclear explosive test minus the weapon grade uranium, but would have the neutron initiator. And so you would blow the thing off, and it would involve a couple hundred kilograms of high explosives. It may be miniaturized. I mean, that can work too. So maybe it's 100 kilograms of high explosive, but nonetheless, it's not the kind of thing you can do indoors. And so you would be doing it in an outside facility.
So, Sarah, do you want to finish the slide here, and then we'll go back to the question Norm raised?
Yeah. So this just shows the layout of the outdoor test site, and of course, it doesn't. First glance, it doesn't look like much in a satellite image, but then if you actually go through time and you can find some higher resolution images, you can actually make out 2 bunkers at this test site. One is a probable camera bunker, and one is a probable control bunker. And so this August 2020 image, for example, shows it nicely, where of course one question is why did they raise the support site and they didn't raise this test site? But hopefully this is where the IAEA went, and not, yeah.
And when the IAEA they found traces of undeclared enriched uranium at a couple places. The Iranians came back with what they call technically not credible responses. So this is another example where the Iranians have been found in violation of the NPT or whatever, and were being pressed by the IAEA for answers more vigorously. And at the moment, I guess for political purposes, are being not pressed so hard while the negotiations take place. Norm, were you concerned when the prior military dimensions of the program were not disclosed last time around?
So to be clear, that's not an intelligence community position. Our job is to say, what do we know? What don't we know? What are the trends, and what does the data tell us? What are we doing to find out more, and when we expect to have it? But these are inherently policymaker calls. And I think as you look forward into where we go, it is not unreasonable to ask, what happens when we come up with information on another site that's located on a military base and Iran denies access? What happens when Iran's military leadership publicly states, as they've repeatedly stated publicly, we're not going to provide access to the IAEA? I think these are policymaker decisions. Patriots can disagree on right or wrong, but there are consequences to ignoring this data, if only because it tells other countries you can get away with this as well. And that's a precedent we need to be very careful about setting.
So one of the things that I find striking in considering the JCPOA and its effort to stop Iran from getting to nuclear weapons by cutting off, sort of one or two pathways, essentially. Either you, as America's policy has been for many, many years around the world to prevent nuclear weapons proliferation, you insist on an agreement that has no enrichment, no reprocessing in country, and they get their fuel for their nuclear power, and they've got robust inspections. So one way to go with Iran, and it seems to me that this was the idea for quite a while, was let them have a research cascade, let them make a choice between an economy and a nuclear enrichment, and hopefully choose an economy. And then, or if they choose to continue with a fuel cycle, then you need robust inspections. But as you say, those kinds of inspections can really only be reliable if they're willing to cooperate, or there's some kind of dispute mechanism that's enforceable. And in the JCPOA, that just wasn't the case. So what is left if we don't have a country that will cooperate? Should the administration, Norm, do you think, I know this is a policy question rather than an intelligence, but should the administration reconsider the approach now and come back to a no enrichment, no reprocessing stance because we can't trust the inspections, or do we try to get inspections better than we had under the JCPOA, and if not, then not move forward? And then David, I'd love to hear your thought about that too.
So I think you have to answer several questions, and again, policymakers of different political persuasions will come down on different views. First, there is no question that Iran's nuclear program was slowly accreting sufficient enriched material for multiple nuclear weapons, and they were slowly acquiring technical capabilities. They had had some technical difficulties in their program. As I say, bad luck happens to bad people doing bad things. I'll leave it at that. And that program was not going as quickly as they had hoped. Secondly, you were reaching the point nonetheless where Iran was not going to give in based on existing evidence to simple sanctions. And it was increasingly apparent that the Israelis and others were considering military action. So up front, if Iran doesn't comply, you do have the possibility of military action, which could lead to a regional conflict. And the word could, that's an important word. It doesn't mean will, it means could. At the same time, as you're going forward, providing Iran with a nuclear enrichment program, and a program does two things. First, the Iranians came into negotiations with 4 red lines. These are public red lines, but they have been consistent not only then, but now. No closure of facilities. Fordow was never closed. You can dismantle it, but you can't close it. R&D continues. R&D has continued at a slower pace, but it continues. Industrial enrichment is maintained. And finally, at some point in the deal, Iran insisted upon the supreme leader insisted upon a capacity that it would be treated as a normal nuclear state at some point. Now, if you stick with all 4 of those, it's hard to come up with a deal that isn't kind of sort of like JCPOA. So policymakers have to make a decision. If you want to risk a military conflict, and risk does not mean we'll have one, then you have to take certain steps. If you give in to the Iranians, now it becomes an issue. How can you deny the Saudis or the Egyptians a nuclear enrichment program if you allow a country such as Iran, which has killed hundreds of Americans and lied about its program and denies the IAEA access and puts off? Well, how can you allow that? This now becomes a political problem with other countries. So this is a complicated issue.
Well, to your point, I mean, we have agreements with other countries, some of them which you named, and others around the world that have no enrichment, no reprocessing. They're not going to want to abide by that. Do we trust Iran more than Japan or Brazil or other countries who are, or Taiwan or in
fairness, the JCPOA has placed Iran under unprecedented international surveillance of its declared enrichment, of declared nuclear enterprise. And there is no public data to suggest that Iran has built a covert system while this is underway. I would throw out one more point that I think is important. If you look at certain events in Iran in the last year, ranging from the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the seizure of the nuclear archive, the death of Soleimani, the death of Abu Muhammad al-Masri and his daughter Miriam, the al-Qaeda operatives, someone has an exquisite understanding of Iran's most sensitive issues and the ability to reach in with a surgical capacity and touch and destroy them. If you're Iran's leadership and you approach, let's say, David or Sarah, the head of their AEOI, and you say, I'd like you to build me a nuclear weapons program covertly, can you get away with it? I frankly think now that it would be hard to make that case in Tehran, given the events of the last couple of years. That's not going to say in the future it's going to continue, but it does say why we must invest heavily in an intelligence capacity and work very closely with partners such as Israel, the United Kingdom, and others to ensure that there are no surprises, because Iran can't be trusted.
So David, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things we looked at in the book is, I mean, we're looking at what we call the 3 pillars of the nuclear weapons program. Making weapon, in the case of Iran, making weapon grade uranium, weaponizing it, and delivering the warhead. And I think if you then look at it in terms of how would you end it, I mean, you mentioned no enrichment. I mean, that's a good way to eliminate the pillar to produce weapon grade uranium. Weaponization, we think robust IA inspections of the type that they used in South Africa could end that pillar. And if you just ended one of the pillars, you would eliminate their nuclear weapons program. Obviously, these things may not be achievable, and you're left with a mixed bag. I think in our own analysis, we felt that if it's the JCPOA and kind of these, I don't want to call them weak inspection, but inspections where you don't get access to military sites, you don't get much of any cooperation from Iran, it's a very unstable situation. And in that, we would argue you have to accept that these methods that Norm just described are going to be the reality. I mean, you can't go to people in Israel and say, you can't do this, because they don't believe that the JCPOA and weak inspections are going to prevent Iran from inching very closely to nuclear weapons capabilities. And if they just did a breakout, let's say at the end of the JCPOA period on nuclear limitations at 2030, they could produce weapon grade uranium soon after that in a matter of weeks or days, and be able to test a device underground within a few months. And so Iran gets so close in a breakout scenario that you can't risk that. And so you want to do things to push it back. And Iran's suffered some accidents in the Natanz in the last year. Assembly facility for advanced centrifuges that was going to be able to assemble thousands, completely destroyed. The Natanz underground site had some serious damage. We don't know the extent of it yet. It may be in the upcoming IAEA reports, but it sets them back. It delays the breakout timeline. And so I think I think that was one of our findings is, and again, there's so many ways I hate to be trite, but to skin a cat. But I think we found that the one scenario that's very dangerous is JCPOA and weak inspections on military sites. I mean, Norm pointed out this JCPOA has just marvelous inspections at the declared fuel cycle facilities. I mean, you couldn't dream of getting better ones, but on the military side, it's not very good at all. But if people can live with these periodic military or forceful actions, I mean, maybe we can kind of find our way through this.
This speaks to kind of some of the political arguments about the agreement. The last time, supporters of the agreement suggested that it was either the agreement or a guaranteed regional war. And in fact, what we've seen in the intervening years, as Norm alluded to, and you've said, the Israelis have proven that there is a third way, to delay and in the United States working together with Israel and Stuxnet itself showed that. So, how do you think about that? What protection do you think the JCPOA affords us now if we were to go back into it for the last sort of 3 years of the 10, and then the remaining 3. As I understand it, the arms embargo has expired. The missile embargo is coming off. They can play with IR-6 centrifuges now, IR-8 centrifuges next year. And then in 2 years, the limits on the IR-8s are raised significantly. And then 2 years after that, limits start to expire. And then 3 years later, they can say, we fulfilled our bargain. We're a nation in good standing in nuclear world, no limits, no sanctions. So how does the JCPOA, since we're in that glide path at the end of the agreement, how does going back into the JCPOA now benefit us?
So just 2 quick comments. In theory, if the JCPOA is to be respected, and I share all of your concerns to include especially on missiles, because it means they could acquire capability to enhance their potential ICBM program based off of their Space Launch Vehicle program. And the arms embargo means they're proliferating weapons that can kill Americans today, as well as Saudis, other nationals, Europeans, et cetera. So we think of a hypothetical nuclear weapons danger, and that's huge and significant. But this week, people could die because of the conventional weapons threat from Iran. But the Iranians also have agreed to sign to the additional protocol in 2023, which would enhance, formalize that with their parliament. That would enhance our capacity to formally understand them. And I think there is a sense in this administration, in the Obama administration, that the oversight would be pursued with great vigor because we have no choice. I do want to associate myself with your comment that I think there was some overheated rhetoric on it's either this or another regional war. There's a lot in the middle of that. The Israelis have not proven anything that was not known in the past, but political rhetoric, I think, did kind of get ahead of itself. And that's not a criticism of the people involved. It's just there's a lot of space between JCPOA and a conventional military war involving hundreds of thousands of US troops and et cetera, et cetera.
David?
No, I don't have anything to add. I mean, I just think that, obviously the Biden administration has said at least they want a longer, stronger deal. And I think that was in the discussions of the JCPOA in 2015, that was also implicit. That I think in a way, it's an agreement that kicks the can down the road, and you'd like the sunsets to be extended, and you'd like the other restrictions to be enforced more, like Section T that bans nuclear weapons related work of several types, a very powerful constraint on nuclear weapons work in the JCPOA, but it hasn't been enforced or verified. And so you can fix these things and have a stronger deal. I mean, I think the question though is the Biden administration going to do that? And if they, and Iran has said no. I mean, government officials issued another statement yesterday saying there will be no longer, stronger deal, but pressure can work. But what is that pressure going to be? And I haven't seen anything from the Biden administration to tell me how they're going to have the leverage if they have the JCPOA back in place to actually get a longer, stronger deal. But I assume, and this is what we thought, the situation's unstable. I mean, Israel might do something. I mean, they've said to me in private, the problem with these approaches is that as the program develops in Iran, it takes bigger and bigger forceful actions to block whatever's going on. Pretty soon it does start to look like a war. And so and also Congress may do something. There's already movement afoot to create some kind of blocking legislation that would require congressional approval for a reinvigorated JCPOA.
And can we even get back to the JCPOA at the moment? The Iranians installed the IR-2M centrifuges that we were told they would never reinstall. They added IR-6s. And again, Norm mentioned their red lines. We're never taking anything down. We're never, are they going to be willing to go back to the baseline at 2015? Or are we going to pay them $7 billion and remove the sanctions in order to get JCPOA minus?
Well, I don't think anyone knows at this point. I mean, I don't have any insight into the negotiation. Maybe Norm does. I mean,
and just one other thing,
Sarah and I don't. I mean, are they going to destroy the ones they built and deployed. I mean, their policy, Norm didn't add this one, but he implied it. The Iranians refuse to destroy centrifuges. And they'll take them apart and store them, but they refuse to destroy them. But there were tens of centrifuges built that are not allowed and rightly should be destroyed under the JCPOA. They shouldn't exist under the JCPOA.
So it's unclear Iran would approach longer, stronger, probably through something along the following path. Since the Trump administration withdrew from the agreement, we have accreted additional capability and technology in our nuclear program. If you want a longer, stronger sunset clause on X capacity, we want to keep some of our capacity, some of our developed capacity. We put money, people, stuff into it. We don't want to waste that. I've got to convince the supreme leader, I've got to convince the hardliners back in Tehran that this deal is worth it and we're getting something from it. So if you want that, we get to keep this. Here's where I think you have an issue to consider. We often talk about the 1 year breakout time. And you have to ask, why is 1 year chosen? Why not 11 months, 15 months, 3 months? And that figure, you could see someone saying, well, why don't we allow them sufficient enriched uranium for a theoretic 9-month breakout? And in exchange, we have negotiated the receipt of additional, longer, deeper oversight in other areas. I think that's kind of how this will play out. And then this will provide in a Rubik's Cube of capacity and thought, this tremendous work for Sarah and David. And I know they'll do tremendous work following that.
Sarah, David, any thoughts on that path?
No, I mean, we were involved in developing this concept of breakout in the public domain, and what Norm said is exactly true. I mean, I think my memory of the discussions in the White House, 2014 maybe, Israel wants 24 months. I mean, we were actually all right with 6 months, because in some ways it's a threat assessment. It's not something that you should over put too much credence on. And but the White House picked a year and then used that to drive the number of centrifuges that Iran could have in the LEU stock. So it was a handy device. I would argue, I think our position has been, we'd rather see a negotiation done like what Norm's talking about, has kind of come to a new understanding that we think could be more stable. It certainly would involve the IA doing more, but it maybe would be resetting the whole process. I mean, we could live with a shorter breakout timeline if other things were constrained. And we've hoped that the Biden administration would go that route of just trying to negotiate something new rather than try to do it in 2 steps.
And your point has been, I think, that despite these questions of timeline breakout, that there is space, there is room for negotiations, for more pressure to build and more negotiations to take place, right? It's not a do or die moment now.
I think so. I mean, in our reading, I found part of this project fascinating because we had the translation capabilities and interpretation capabilities to really listen to some of the key Iranians, because they chatter a lot on TV, particularly some of the former members of the nuclear weapons program, and there one in particular, a guy named Dr. Basi Davani, is a member of parliament now, and he. In what he described, it seemed that Iran's goal is to drive again, I'm interpreting and putting it in breakout terminology, sort of drive the breakout timeline down to a month. And then they felt they could negotiate best from that position. And, in the scheme of things, I mean, I could live with that kind of breakout timeline if negotiations were going on. I wouldn't get panicked by it. Because again, if Norm made the point that it'd be very risky for Iran right now to break out to try to build nuclear weapons or to sneak out to build nuclear weapons. So I think we can tolerate a lower breakout timeline while negotiations go on toward to a more stable deal. And it doesn't create pressures for proliferation in the region. I mean, who knows what Saudi Arabia is going to do what Egypt's going to do. But I think, as Norm also pointed out, they're probably not going to sit still.
So, when we consider the situation that we're facing, the kind of there's some unknowns. We negotiated the agreement. I would say slightly under false pretenses, I guess. If perhaps, and again, Norm, I don't know what you knew at the time. I know we had a list of suspected sites, but if the breadth of what we found in the archive, the 9 or so sites, I think you, David and Sarah, say weren't really known before, none of which have been visited except for those that have found highly enriched uranium that can't be explained. And the other workshops and other sites that may have, again, as Norm said, they may be dismantled now, but have at the time done things that were important or have employees who might remember. What is it that needs to happen in order to address the gaps in our knowledge? This is a policy question. These sort of PMD questions, it seems to me, are more important to answer now than even in 2015, given how close they are, what tools they have. How can we judge their ability to cheat if we don't know what they've got or what they can do?
Well, you mentioned the early on, they knew a lot about making nuclear weapons. I mean, that was a surprise to us. And it was a surprise to the Israelis that assessed the archive, that it wasn't a copy, wasn't a knockoff from a Pakistani design. I mean, they really had developed a capability to understand and design nuclear weapons. And that's still there. Some of the people involved have been killed, but they train others. And so it did maybe been set back, but it certainly wasn't eliminated. And so they are, in our assessment, they are closer to being able to make nuclear weapons than we thought before we started this project. And that has to be factored in. So I think, I mentioned a 1-month breakout timeline. I accept that only in the context that negotiations are going on to solve the problem. I mean, you don't want to have a situation where they're going down to 1-month breakout timeline or shorter and nothing is happening. So I think you've got to really work this problem intensely to try to end up at a point that is where they're further from the bomb. You have confidence that you understand their nuclear weapons production capabilities better. And that would, in my mind, translate into greater IA access and understanding of the program, and that you've reached some kind of deal that is acceptable to both sides.
Sarah, as you look down from the skies at the pictures that you saw and the facilities and the infrastructure that was built, I was taken aback by the breadth of the infrastructure. Did you find it surprising to see how many sites, how much was being built?
Yes, so I think physical infrastructure is a good way to look at progress made and money spent, investments made into the program. But I actually wanted to go back quickly to the post-military, possible military dimensions, and saying that the IAEA seems to be increasingly frustrated with Iran's non-cooperation. And just yesterday, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, he made 3 very important points. One of them being that he can't understand the present without the past, and that there are some people who want to say this stuff is old and want to dismiss it, but he's not one of them because he can't do his job without knowing the past.
The other thing he said was Iran is enriching uranium to a level that only countries that make bombs make, right?
Yeah, and from my, again, from the breakout point of view, it looks like Iran's practicing breakout. I mean, go look at how different ways to get up to 60%. I mean, they didn't make that much. I think it's public reports 2.5 kilograms, but still it's disturbing. And civil programs just typically don't do that. And particularly a program that has really no need for 60%. They can argue, we'll have nuclear powered submarines, but that's a glint in their eye. It's not anything that's real. They're decades away from that kind of capability. So they don't need to make 60% now.
Right. Nora, I wish you could do a Farsi accent, because I imagine you could probably give us the inside the mind of the Iranians what they really want. One of the things that I heard in the last go around was that in the end of the day, the supreme leader doesn't really want a great deal because he wants to maintain this path and is not really interested in the economic integration with the West to the degree that Iranian advocates for the agreement hoped he might be, because that would create decadence in there, and it would maybe weaken their control of the economy. I don't know. What do you think the supreme leader ultimately wants? Does Iran want to be a top 5 player in the world with nuclear weapons? Does he want to be left alone? Are they still a regional hegemonic ambition? What is Iran?
He certainly has a regional hegemonic ambition, and retaining a capacity to go close to a nuclear weapon without achieving the nuclear weapon actually gives you much of that capacity. In fact, one can make a case they should never develop a nuclear weapon if they just have this ability to come close to it and a capacity to protect their oil exports, the repatriation of revenues from all other exports and use of financial systems, and an ability to proliferate to militias. They achieve all of their goals. And they're able to sit with the major powers, the P5 powers, which is a big deal for Iran because it's a relatively modest country, a modest economy. The supreme leader does prefer that Iran is less economically integrated with the world for 2 reasons. One, it allows them to avoid sanctions pressure in the decision making, but it's more importantly, it allows them to avoid the cultural contagions of Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pizza Hut that undermine the revolution. And a key element on engagement is when people talk about the United States and Iran being willing to engage the US, it can't happen. It's if you were the devil, sitting with Jesus, having a reasonable conversation about how people should work kind of undermines the reason for being the devil. And for the Iranians to sit with the great Satan implies a respect and a recognition and engagement that makes you question, what's the purpose of the Iranian Revolution if you're willing to engage the very people who sustain the Shah? So we're now going through this leadership transition period to a new supreme leader. The average age of Iran's revolutionary generation is deceased. He doesn't have a plan for changing the economy. If Mohammed bin Salman has planned 2030, he has planned 1979. And I think sustaining that paradigm for the foreseeable future is where Iran will go.
We have just time for a couple last things. Norm, what are the implications for American policy if, say, Iran were to just test a bomb? They invade Bahrain and say to the Saudis, you come across that border, we'll consider all our options. Or Israel, has soldiers kidnapped and they're in a fight with Lebanon and we'll consider all our options. And they've tested, it seems like the implications for America, and they're not just going to go nuclear, those countries, right? They're going to try to cozy up to Iran. These are real dangers for American policy.
The Biden administration has correctly stated that if solving Middle Eastern problems are difficult now, they'll be more difficult if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. And that's true. But I need to go one into the middle and say, if the policies are now not constraining Iran's regional activities because you provide it with resources to prevent it from developing a nuclear weapon, it's actually just as dangerous. Again, a threat to Americans. And I think other adversaries around the world look at us. If China looks at how we handle Iran, if we're not have some deterrence, are we really serious about Taiwan? If we're not going to protect Bahrain, would we protect Estonia? Would we protect the Ukraine? Would we protect Taiwan?
Okay, 2 minutes here to the end. David, Sarah, congratulations on that book. Really, as Norm said, it's an achievement of epic proportion, and I hope everyone gets a chance to understand and digest and process the information. Do you want to leave us with just some final thoughts, each, maybe a minute each, on what you found and what you think?
Sarah, you want to go first?
I have to think about it real quick.
Yeah, no, I think for us, it was we will seize any opportunity to understand a secret nuclear weapons program, and we hope that it's that it's of benefit. I mean, it's encouraging to hear both of you say positive things about the book. I mean, ultimately, we want people to understand these programs better so they can develop the tools to better stop them. I mean, that's fundamentally our goal.
Well, David, you may be the last honest man in Washington, as they say. You've taken a lot of heat for being objective and maintaining, that very astute academic pursuit and not making your analysis part of the political debate in town, as many others have been dragged into. So those of us who care about the substance of this issue appreciate that enormously. And Norm, thank you for your insights and for joining us today, and Sarah for your hard work. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this important discussion. Iran's Perilous Pursuit of Nuclear Weapons, I'm sure you can find on Amazon. It's actually, the hardcover is $60, but the electronic version is just $5.99. It's a wonderful gift and a great read, and an incredible thing to begin to understand as we go forward in this policy discussion times ahead. I hope we get together again with you guys again soon, and have an enjoyable week. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
Thanks, Norman.
Bye. Great seeing you all. Goodbye.